Welcome back to the Unabated podcast. I'm Gina Fiore. This week, Tom and Jack sit down with writer David Hill to discuss his recent feature article in Rolling Stone magazine about the state of sports betting in America. He talks about how his research led him all over the US and Central America and what he learned about the future of sports betting. He also shares a story about meeting the 47th President of the United States. Please enjoy this week's episode with David Hill.
Unabated. That's the new word, unabated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome on into the Unabated podcast. I'm Thomas Viola, and joining me, as always, Mr. Unabated himself, Captain Jack Andrews. But Jack, today we are blazing through the banter section, and we are headed straight into our interview here because we have a very special guest with us here, world-renowned author David Hill. His newest piece in Rolling Stone, Sportsbook Nation, is out now. It's going to be on the print shelves real soon. David, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to talk with you.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for saying I'm world renowned. I appreciate that. I'm not sure if it's true, but I this piece was an assignment. I had written a piece for Rolling Stone. Folks read it earlier this year about Formula One in Las Vegas, and after I finished that story, it turned out I think there was another writer who was working on this piece for Rolling Stone who then backed out of it, and they asked me if I would take over. And their sense of the story was the way they pitched it to me was that they felt like they needed a fast food nation for sports betting. And for folks who may not be familiar, Fast Food Nation was a series of articles in Rolling Stone. I want to say in the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, about the fast food industry and how it impacted American culture, American economy, like kind of this sort of deep dive into the fast food industry. And it turned into a book and then a movie, a film, like an actual scripted film. So Rolling Stone felt like maybe there was a need for that type of a deep dive into the sports betting industry. And they asked me if I thought I could do something like that. And I said, yes, definitely. I feel like I've been sort of mentally preparing to write that story for many years now. So I was happy to take the assignment.
And you covered so much ground in it too, like to hit all of the different interviews that you got, even one here with Jack. The piece is the $11 billion online sportsbook bubble about to burst again, out now in Rolling Stone. And you talk to a guy who's courtsiding, you talk to Jack, and you every step of the way here, you talk to multiple operators from both the black market and our friend of the show, Alex Kane from Sport Trade. And every step of the way, you're just highlighting a different vignette, a different story about a different facet of the industry here. Which one was your favorite of these trips that you took and these adventures that you got to go on with these people? And you're not allowed to say Jack.
Well, thank you, Jack, for hanging out with me for the story. I really do appreciate it. I actually forced Jack to go bet kiosks with me because, I told him like, I want to go do something. Everybody I interviewed for this story, I tried to go to a game or, I wanted to like have there be some sort of activity. I didn't want to just sit and do interviews like I wanted to do. So, I'd had this idea that came out of a conversation I had with Jack at a coffee shop, really, where he was talking about people betting on kiosks. I know that's what your last episode of your podcast was all about. So I thought that'd be fun. Let's do that together. And he was very kind to, on a very gloomy weekday morning, to go meet me and do this with me. But I think it added a lot, to the story to have that scene of us, in the casinos running around and betting on kiosks. And it helped. And the activity was illustrative of a point that I think you were trying to make that helped kind of hammer that point home a little bit too. But I would say that my favorite was going to Costa Rica. I mean, that was a cool experience. And there's a lot that didn't make it into the piece. Maybe hopefully one day someone will let me write the fuller version of this story because Costa Rica was quite an interesting experience. And let's just say there were things that I saw down there that were not probably not for publication, but it was listen, I've been all over and I've been in a lot of weird and interesting and situations. And down in Costa Rica, I think I saw some stuff that was shocking even to my libertine my libertine sensibilities.
Oh man, that sounds like a second podcast in itself right here. So
Dave, when you're pitching this story to Rolling Stone and you say you're going to cover sports betting from around the nation, all the different facets, all the different stakeholders, did they expect it to get as diverse as you got it? I mean, you talked to casino owners, you talked to offshore operators, myself. You really kind of covered the full gamut. Were they expecting this? I kind of get the fast food nation analogy. I think that's actually very fitting. But were they expecting this, or were they expecting it to go a different way?
I don't think they were expecting this. No, and I'm not sure I was either. I really kind of came up with the idea for how I ended up structuring it. Somewhere this past summer, like I'd reported, I sort of just dove into reporting it and talking to people. And, originally my idea was, like I said, to just do interviews with people, but to be with them and have maybe some set pieces for those interviews to take place at, whether it was a ball game or whatever at a casino. But I think eventually this structure came to my mind that there were these characters that sort of each character represented maybe a perspective. And, then I saw that like there was a way to tell the story about sports betting from all these different perspectives by giving a section of the story to each of those. And if you notice when you read it, like, you know, each section, that character and their perspective, we sort of, it's a point of departure to get into a lot of different topics, right? So like, there's a section in the piece called The Casino Boss. It's about Derek Stevens and Circa, but really that's a section about Bet Bash, about the Hall of Fame, and also and then, I sort of end at the blackjack ball. So it's not really a section about the perspective of casino bosses. Really, that section is about Circa, and it's about the present. You know what I mean? So I think of that section more about like this is the present day and this is where things are at, maybe sort of a sense of where things are headed, right? So it's sort of loose. There's like a loose construction there around these different characters and their perspectives, but really it's about kind of going past, present, future too.
So our friend Andy Molitor tweeted the Canterbury Tales of sports betting, which I thought was actually a brilliant
What a shocker. Andy Molitor had a
reference.
great tweet.
Yeah. First of many. So in the story, I think the one that I would have liked to read a little bit more about was the Courtsider.
Yeah.
And maybe that was left a little ambiguous just because of what he was doing. I don't know. Maybe. So, okay, there's my first question. Did the legal team at Rolling Stone have any trouble with profiling a couple guys that are kind of skirting the rules?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First, yeah, the lawyers had a field day with this story, and we had a lot of conversations with lawyers before the final draft, and I rewrote some things based on advice from lawyers. But one of the things that people kept saying as various people read the story was like, did this person know they were being recorded? As
I
if
had the
like
same
I'd like
thought.
okay, yeah, so I think that like it surprised people, but I'll even say that in trying to I knew that I wanted to find somebody to go courtsiding with because I had this idea that I wanted to do things other than just talk to people or even just talk about people looking at their screens, right? I mean, one thing that you guys are well aware of is that the life of a professional can be a fairly staid, life where people are sort of in front of the day to day can be, I don't want to say boring, but you know what I mean? Like it's hard as a writer, there's not a lot of action to describe. So I thought, well, one way I could get around that is courtsiding because then you're actually not only doing things, but you're at a sporting event which centers sports. And also there's like this activity that feels almost like a heist. So I thought that would be kind of a cool thing to do. And so what I did was I went in the Unabated Discord and I asked if anybody would talk to me about courtsiding. And what was funny was that you can go and look at this in the Discord, but like in the main channel, people are like, are you kidding? No one's ever going to talk to you about this. But in my DMs, I was flooded with people in my DMs being like, what do you want to know? I'll talk to you or whatever. I mean, I had a number of people who offered to take me with them or to, invite me into to see how they do it. And in fact, I even got invited to go to Wimbledon with a group, which I wanted to do, but it conflicted with a family obligation that I had, which really bummed me out because that would have been cool. Even if Rolling Stone was going to pay for it, I would have just gone to go courtsiding at Wimbledon with these guys. But what was cool is that I ended up going with Scott to a Mets game, and what was great about that was that Scott ended up being so interesting. Like, yes, courtsiding is interesting, but I was far more interested in Scott and his life, and so that ended up being this like real lucky accident where to meet him and to be able to utilize him as like the top of the story, because I really feel like I could have written a whole article just on his life alone. So I feel like I got really lucky there.
I really enjoyed how it was each vignette was covering a different facet through the eyes of someone who's actually doing that. It was such a creative way to portray the story and really make you get that sense, that snapshot of so much of the gambling industry.
Well, and the other thing I wanted to do was center sports, because I think that when people talk about sports betting, a lot of times it's stuff that you read. It's like you read business story. It's like a tech story. It doesn't feel like sports is centered unless there's some sort of like sports scandal going on, right? And so I really liked being able to go to games throughout the year, or even to like in Pittsburgh, getting to go run through the tunnel and pretend to be an athlete, but like centering sports and to remind the reader along the way that this is what this whole thing revolves around, is this like important, kind of cornerstone of American culture, which is professional in sports. So I thought that that was a good way to do that too, was to have the interviews take place at sporting events.
Now,
So, oh, sorry, Tom. I just got a quick interjection about a couple of years ago, you had the Gamblers podcast for The Ringer. And at the time, I remember thinking how great it was to feel like you're there. And I noticed you took a lot of that same approach with the interviews in this article. I wanted to ask how, in the Gamblers podcast, you profiled various gamblers, Rufus being one of them, Gina being one of them. How was this different than that? Because you did follow Rufus around doing Super Bowl props, but how are sports bettors different than casino APs? I think you had some.
I
What
did it
was?
all. I had it
Yeah,
all.
you
yeah,
covered it all: horse
I
racing,
mean,
everything. So how were the
I
sports
mean,
bettors different?
one of the things I tried to do with the Gamblers podcast, maybe to my demise, was I really wanted to showcase people gambling on a lot of different things. And I didn't want it all to be about poker and sports. I wanted to find every type of possible thing that people gamble at every sort of walk of life, at every kind of level and rung of the ladder, too. So, I have an episode about a chess player, a pool hustler, people that race, like street racing cars. I had all, and, in the end, that may have been a mistake because for each of those types of topics, there might be a little niche audience and there might be a lot, but most people maybe don't care. So that might have been one of the things that hurt the show, because the only people who are going to hang around for the whole series are people who just love this idea of gamblers, people that make a living that way. I do think that sports bettors do present, like I said before, a unique challenge to that type of storytelling. So insofar as there's not a lot of action that goes on, and because a lot of the kind of really creative thinking that goes on with prose is a little esoteric. It's hard. It's hard for me, the writer, to be like, one of the challenges I have is to take the things that I learn from folks like you and then translate it for an audience that's even squarer than I am, right? And a lot of stuff gets lost in that translation, and sometimes it might be too esoteric for the regular reader to really appreciate some of the finer, like um, um, beauty and for lack of a better word, and in the way that professionals sort of come up with angles and edges and stuff like that. So that's hard. Whereas in a game like pool, it might be a lot easier to describe, and kind of might be more, what I think sports betting offers that's really cool and helpful for me as a writer is that the world of sports betting is quite old and it's colorful. It has a language that belongs just to that world. And as a writer, one of the things that really attracts me just to gambling in general, but to sports betting in particular, is that it's helpful to me as a writer when the thing that I'm writing about, the culture I'm writing about, has its own language and its own way of describing things and its own way of talking, that when I can use it in my writing makes me look like I'm a better writer, or maybe that, I'm a more interesting writer, when really all I'm doing is sort of like saying, using the language of this world that I'm writing about. So I really love that about sports betting.
and another thing that you really were able to get across in the article, I mean, it comes straight from the title of Is the Bubble About to Burst? You were able to talk about a lot of the problems that the industry is facing and highlight it from a lot of different angles by talking to operators like Alex, who are burdened by the tax revenue issues with different states. You have people like Derek who are trying to operate a large scale, sharp action taking casino. And you even mentioned that you yourself got limited by a sports book in the course of writing this piece. There's a lot of red flags and a lot of problems that you raise. In all of your conversations, do you come away hopeful for solutions to some of these problems? Do you think that there are good days on the horizon here? What's your take on the betting industry as a whole right now?
Well, first thing I'll say is that the piece is titled Sportsbook Nation, and that the title on the web page is this like SEO type thing that they've written at Rolling Stone. That it's funny because I feel like on Twitter a lot of people have really engaged with that headline without reading the story, and it's like, okay, well, they're either like they're arguing in Twitter about whether or not the bubble is bursting or not, when really if you read the piece, like that's kind of beside the point.
Yeah.
But I do think that the things, a lot of what I've come to think about the future of sports betting really is stuff that I've learned from folks like Jack, and what people who listen to your show are probably already very familiar with, right? That the future for sports betting is going to look much different than it does today, and that if it is going to be better, it'll only be better because it might be smaller, right? And that this idea of trying to be so big and do so much and do all things is actually where a lot of these like problems have come from. That the desire by like FanDuel, for example, to offer a menu of 50,000 bets every day leads to problems for FanDuel, problems for the bettors. You know what I mean? Like that's where a lot of that's sort of the genesis of a lot of these issues. One of the things I was surprised about was that when I went to Costa Rica and talked to folks there, they're all worried about the same stuff that DraftKings and FanDuel are worried about. They're all concerned about the same things. They're worried about being taken advantage of. They're worried about being late to information. They're worried about their numbers being wrong. They're worried about courtsiders, like this, the night that I was in the betting office, they were so stressed trying to figure out who's courtsiding them, because they were like, at every single game, they're getting hit by courtsiders. But their solutions were fundamentally different, right? They weren't to limit people. It was to take bets later in the week. It was to, use auto movers, things like that. And so I thought it was interesting to see how they are innovating solutions for the same problems that the American sports books are, just using this like whatever, this like sledgehammer of limiting people to try to deal with. And the other thing that I learned that was surprising was that while people like us who gamble might be very frustrated about limiting, the vast majority of people who aren't limited don't care, and they're not sympathetic to professionals whatsoever. Like they don't seem to care about whether or not someone should have a right to earn a living off of these sports books. Because I feel like so much of the American public who's now betting on sports for the first time post PASPA have just adopted this attitude of, yeah, of course you can't win. Of course they're going to beat you. It's all rigged. Vegas has it rigged. Like they've almost like, it feels like a lot of people have internalized this injustice as being just the way it is, and don't think that, don't have a lot of sympathy for people who are saying it was better, could be better, should be better, or whatever. So I think that's an issue too, is that they don't like the sports books, but they don't like them for the same reasons that maybe professionals don't like them for. So, I don't know that their sympathy lies with the professional. I think that there's got to be a way to get people to understand, or people to work together and understand that like the sports book doesn't have anybody's best interest in mind, whether it's the recreational player or the professional player or the VIP player. Like they don't share the best interest with any of those groups of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really resonates with what my initial take of the European audience was about 6 years ago when regulation was just hitting us. I would hear from a lot of people in Europe who would be like, you're not going to win. They're going to limit. They're going to restrict. They're going to do all this BS that'll make it a lot tougher for you. Don't even try. And it's unfortunate that we're getting kind of that same feeling in the US after just a few years. They had a couple decades to kind of get used to it. It's troublesome. But Dave, in the story, you mentioned that you got limited. They're like bad beat stories, right? You never want to hear somebody else's limited story, but tell us how you got limited and what the consequences were.
Well, I got limited at a number of different books, and I think it was a different reason at every book. And it's funny because if you remember at the gaming roundtable when they finally got the sports books there, and I was at it as well, when they were asking them about limiting, they said, "Hey, people know why they know why they got limited. We don't have to tell them because they all know." I don't know that that was always the case, but I have a good sense of why I got limited different books. At one book, I took a deposit bonus and it was like one of these VIP deposit bonuses. So I put in a lot of money to get the bonus, and then I was immediately limited when I was trying to like, hit the rollover or whatever by betting through. I got limited. So I think I got limited there just as like a, whatever, like a dastardly way to get me to lose as much as I could before I could earn the bonus. At another book, I got limited because I was betting college football halves and quarters and I was winning. So once I started winning at those, I got limited. And when they limited me, one of your friends, the friends of your show, Ellie, who suggested, well, just bet. He suggested to me I should just bet round robin parlays, and then I can get around the limits that way. So I did that, and it worked. And then now I'm limited to 1 penny on round robin parlays. And no, listen, none of these bets were big. I mean, even before I got limited, I was only betting $100. Like I
Yeah.
was not, I was betting $100 on halftime bets or on quarter bets. I got limited down to like, whatever, 20, and then now a penny on the parlays. And then another book I got limited because I bet a anytime touchdown. There was I think it was a DraftKings. They had you could parlay a friend of mine told me about this. He was somebody who I met while reporting the story, and he was like, you can parlay the punt returner and the defense special teams together in an anytime touchdown parlay. If you do that live and you do it like in the third quarter, and you get this like astronomical price because it treats it like they're independent events, uncorrelated events. But then if the guy, if that guy runs back the punt, then you score anyway. I hit one of those, and after I hit it, now I can't make any anytime touchdown bets at DraftKings. I mean, they're all limited to like 25 cents. Like they won't let me have any more bites. Even like a straight one, even like just a regular anytime touchdown, they won't give it to me. So
Wow.
that bit me there. Yeah. Yeah, and I asked them, I got to ask some of these guys about this in these conversations, and these conversations were all off the record and on background, but I did get to confront the sports books about it, and without saying the names of any of the sports books that I talked to while interviewing this piece, but they would say to me, they'd say, well, we only limit people for things like courtsiding and for doing all these. And I'd say, well, you limited me. And then I'd get to have these kind of back and forth conversations about why I got limited. And once I confronted them and said, well, here's why I got limited, they would just say, well, why should we take your action if you've got a better number than us? We're not, I think one sports book told me we can either change our price or we could limit you. Why should we change our price for everybody else just because of you, just so we could take your bet of $100? And I felt like that was kind of a weird answer because you should change your price because if you think that my number's better, you should change it. But
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, the guy I was talking to wasn't a trader either. So I don't want to I felt it was sort of pointless to like argue with him or even to like blow up his spot about it. But that was sort of a goofy answer. But I think he was just sort of put on the spot about it.
Yeah, there are operators out there that like courtsiders. Because think about it, courtsiders give you more perfect information than what your line service is giving you and faster information. So I know of operators who actively seek out courtsiders and try to find their exact geolocation and pin off that to know that they can use this guy's bets to shape the line faster than they can get the real-time feed from the licensed operator. But
I think it's important to remember that the courtsider takes risks too, because one of the things that editors ask me and other people that have read the story have asked me is they're like, well, how is it that the courtsider is able to do it faster than the person hitting the button? And the reason is because the sport radar guy is not allowed to hit the button until the play is done. The courtsider can guess. And so they still take a tiny bit of risk, right? A tiny bit of risk that the sport radar guy is not allowed to take. Right? They're not allowed to take that little bit of risk. They have to know that the guy's not going to drop the ball. The play has to be done. So they are taking a little bit of risk still, which I think is worth pointing out here, that like that their advantage that they have here is their willingness to take that little bit more of a risk than Sport Radar will take or that the book will take. And this is the theme of my whole piece, which is that The problem, the irony of this whole thing is that the sports books don't want to take any risks.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're getting thumped by people who are willing to take a little bit more risk than they are. And that's what I think is so interesting to me is that I say in the piece, like, there's some profound irony here. They all want to get rich off of gambling, but they don't want to gamble at all. They don't want to get, the shareholders don't want them to gamble. They don't want to take a single risk. And I think that to me is one of the more interesting, sort of dynamics of this whole industry.
It's the corporatization of everything, but the corporatization of sports betting. I mean, those conversations of what is going on with our liability here, they're very different at FanDuel HQ than they are down at South Point. If Michael Gahn is like, "Hey, Vinny, what's going on with the lines today?" Like, it's going to be just a completely different business now that we have so much corporate interest in it.
Right. And what FanDuel would say is, well, you know, South Point Sportsbook is backed by all those slot machines, and we don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would use what you just said as a lead in to what I think their next pitch is to the state legislators of America, which is give us the slot machines. we want the slot machine. We want to put slot machine in people's pockets, because if Vegas sports books, if they're doing anything better than us, it's only because they're backed by the slot machines, and we just need the same business that they have.
And Jack, I know we were going to talk a little bit about iCasino, and Jack was like, maybe we save that for another podcast. But like you talk about it, you guys have both talked about this an extent, both in this piece and Jack, you everywhere else. It is the end game. You think that they don't see all of that revenue that comes in from the iCasino stuff, and you talk about it in the piece where you say they'd much rather be getting the slots where it's just fixed action and they know they're going to win.
Yeah, and I think Roxy Roxborough gave me the most, one of the most sort of eye-raising quotes for the whole story, which is that he says, "Look, I'm not worried." He says, "I think people are so worried about sports betting in America. We've had sports betting in America for hundreds of years. Like, we're going to survive sports betting, but I don't know that we can survive a casino in everybody's pocket." So I thought that was a very prescient and quote, because it's true that, like, I think that from my perspective, there is a big difference between sports gambling at the scale that we see it today and mobile casino at the scale. If we put at that same scale or larger, I think there'd be a major difference. Especially, this is not to say that there aren't any sort of harms or ills that come with sports betting. Of course there are, and I think that they're woefully under-resourced by the states and by the industry. But I think that those harms are much more intensified when we talk about something like mobile casino. And yet that's the one thing that they want. And I don't think those two things are unrelated. I think the fact that they want it so bad and the fact that it actually can lead to so many more negative outcomes I think those two things are actually related.
Yeah, I mean, you talked to Elizabeth Thielen in the piece and how she was a problem better who's now on the road to recovery and helping people recover themselves. But you also mentioned it's clear that with the ballooning of sports betting, the ballooning of problem gambling has been just as bad. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface on what this is going to mean as a society in the future.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but I could not escape this idea that limiting and VIP programs and problem gambling, that these things they're all linked and connected, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you have a program for VIPs where you want big wagerers because that's where all their profits come from. This statistic that gets batted around a lot in this industry about how something like 85% of the profits are coming from 10% or fewer of the players is wild. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it shows that they need large VIP players to make profit, and that those same players are going to be prevented from ever winning, because we all know that if they show an aptitude to win, they'll get limited down to where they will no longer be able to wager at the levels that are profitable. So that says that the only people that can really help these sports books make their profits are large wagerers who don't win, who lose. And they're going to be encouraged to continue to deposit and lose. And so how this doesn't also lend itself to problem gambling behaviors. I don't see how you could argue that these things are somehow divorced from one another. The only way that somebody who's a VIP player has a fair shot is if they actually can win. And if we know that players that show an ability to win get limited, they'll never win. They can only, you're going to get kicked out. Or you're going to lose. So this is where, and this is the term ban or bankrupt that I guess was a term that was borrowed from overseas, but it's being, I'm glad that it's being circulated here because it seems very apt that those are the two roads for a person that wants to bet on sports is they can either bet a lot of money and lose, or they can bet a little bit of money and win.
And then you talk to JR and the gray market casinos, the offshore casinos, the offshore books, they're starting to get back some of those recreational players that used to bet with a bookie and then said, oh, well, now I've got FanDuel in my pocket. I can just do that. And then if somebody happens to luck into a few good bets in a row and gets limited, all of a sudden, boom, it's right back to the offshores. And we're not getting any of the windfalls.
Those guys are I will say those guys that I talked to down there were quite salty about it all, because if they had their druthers, they would just have all the like the college students who are betting responsibly and losing $100 on it. They would rather have them. But what they're getting back are the big players. And so they're having to accept the players we're going to get back are going to be these big players who are getting limited, which means they're probably sharp. But we're going to take their action because it's a volume game or whatever, and we're going to have to be smart about how we book to them. So, you know what I mean? So, the people who FanDuel and DraftKings and BetMGM and all the American books are throwing back offshore are going to be players who either are winners or players who are, who need credit or whatever. And I think that what those guys were telling me was look, we would prefer to have all the recreational players back and just earn off of lots of rec players, but they took them from us, so we're going to have to figure out how to earn off of the sharp players now.
And that's the interesting dynamic, and maybe one part of the industry that you didn't cover was the rise of the sweepstakes books. Maybe that was a little too late in the game for the article, but they have the advantage of having a very lower barrier to entry, as well as a higher convenience factor for potential bettors. And so now they're getting some of those recreational bettors that the regulated books aren't, and that the offshores haven't found. And it's, maybe they're in the best position moving forward. I don't know. What are your thoughts on sweepstakes betting and how it kind of plays into this entire ecosystem?
Well, I actually did do a lot of research and interviews about sweepstakes, and including talking to you about it quite a bit. And I had a lot on sweepstakes, and it originally was going to be a big part of this piece because to me it was so fascinating, and it felt like it was so important to any discussion about the futures. It fell victim to being something that one of these things that is it required more column inches to explain what the hell this is and how it's distinct. Then you know what I mean? By the time you even explain what it is, you're already halfway done with, the allotted amount section in that section before you can even get into what's the future look like. So it just was too heady. And I decided to leave it out of the piece. So again, I hope one day I can expand on some of this stuff, because I do feel like that is a major part of the story right now is sweepstakes, and sweepstakes for sports, but also this sweepstakes model will be utilized to get around iCasino as well, right? So it's going to be, it's happening in some states, like in Pennsylvania. I think they've got these skill games, these skill machines that are popping up all over Pennsylvania, which are just these, slot machines that are using these strange loopholes in the law and Pennsylvania's trying to figure out how to crack down on it. And what they're going to do is I think I heard Pennsylvania legislators say in two different meetings I was at, is that they're not going to get rid of skill games. They're going to regulate them, right? And this is the play. This is the same thing with the sweepstakes operators. Their play is to be what they call first movers. And I think I heard at one conference, I think it was someone from Caesars, but it was an executive from one of the major gaming companies said, look, these sweepstakes companies, they're smart. We would be doing this if we could, but we have a gaming license that we can't jeopardize. So we're not going to. We're going to end up being second movers. And so these guys who are the first movers, meaning they're the first ones to go in and set up shop in this gray area, once it all gets regulated, they're going to have the advantage of having been first. And this is the same thing we saw with DraftKings and FanDuel as daily fantasy operators. They were first movers into this space, wrapped their arms around a big customer pool that they then parlayed into having 70% of the market once regulation happened. So the play here is to go in, take up space, and dare attorneys general to come in and shut you down, because they won't shut you down. They will regulate you and they'll tax you. And now you're a legit business and you're the first one in the space. And all the big boys are watching this happen, and they're pissed about it because they know that like they're going to end up being the next into that space and they'll be a little bit late to the game. So it is wild to watch. And it's crazy when you learn that that's the way the sausage gets made in America, is that if you have enough money and you operate enough scale, you don't have to follow the law. You can just go do whatever you want and be big enough that they're not going to put you in cuffs. They're going to, legalize what you do and instead figure out how to get their, get their beaks wet on it.
And even with the beaks, it's still another thing that you talk about in the piece is the state legislatures and everybody saying, okay, well, we were promised this big windfall and all of this big growth would come back to help us. And all of a sudden, you're also sitting there like, well, that hasn't really happened. And also, we have all these other things that have popped up that have been a little more negative based on it.
Yeah, it really sucks. I mean, I wish that my deadline had come after the DraftKings third quarter report that just came out, because it was so fun to have this quote from Jason Robbins talking about what did he call it? Like unexpected sporting outcomes or customer
Yeah.
friendly sporting outcomes, as a way to explain that the favorites covered the spread, which is like not an argument that shareholders of a publicly traded company are going to tolerate for very long. That like, sorry, earnings are down, but whatever, the favorites all covered. But I do think that like it's wild to me that what's happening right now is they went in, they overpromised and underdelivered in some situations with revenue, because it's a low margin business where they're booking and they take some risk and they don't like that. And so their answer to these state legislators is two things. One is lower our tax rate, which is what they're saying in New York, the only state that's really made any real significant revenue off of this, because they have this 51% tax rate and they've made billions of dollars. Or they're saying, give us mobile casino, right? So they're saying, okay, I know we overpromised, but we can still get you the money for the cops and the roads and the nurses that we promised you, but you just got to give us this. You got to give us, you just got to give us this extra thing and we'll get the money to you. So I just think that like, again, it's sort of, this is America, right? This is the way politics works in America, I suppose. And it's frustrating to me because I do think that one of the things I learned after reporting this story is that this is an industry that a lot of the state legislators who are writing legislation and making these decisions right now about it know nothing about, very little to nothing about. And the industry is getting organized and they're forming industry associations and they've got law firms and lobbying groups that are helping them. And they're the ones who are bending the ear of these legislators to write the laws, to plan the next phases, et cetera, et cetera. And customers don't really have the same voice, and smaller operators who operate at a much smaller scale, like Sport Trade and Play, they don't really have the same voice. And so there's this real imbalance. And somehow somebody's got to figure out how to get in there and make sure that the big publicly traded corporations that have the huge market share aren't the only voices that get represented in writing this legislation going forward, because otherwise it's just going to be a freight train, and it's going to be a freight train that has one group's interests in mind as they plow through the whole country.
Yeah, absolutely. You put more eloquently a lot of the words that I have in my head constantly. So
It's almost like he's a
always,
writer.
yeah, it's it's almost like I'd be better off just betting sports than trying to communicate some stuff sometimes. Now, Dave, you and I have something in common. We both had a personal interaction with a casino owner decades ago. A guy that just was elected president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us your Donald Trump story, because
All
it's a
right,
good
so
one.
when I turned 25, my girlfriend and some friends took me to Atlantic City to celebrate. And so it was my 25th birthday, and I was at the Taj, which is now called the Hard Rock, but it used to be the Trump Taj Mahal. used to be the place to go in Atlantic City. I guess I'm dating myself here, but I was in the poker room at the Taj, and Donald Trump comes stumbling in with Mark Anthony, the singer, the Latin pop singer, and he's like, "I want to show you my favorite part of my casino," and he brings him into the poker room. And the Taj is this massive poker room, right?
Hmm.
And so I see them come in, and I knew that, we had just had the World Series of Poker. It just happened. And this guy, Robert Varconi, had just won. He was a New Yorker and he won the championship. So he's the world champ. And he was there, like what used to happen in the old days, every time somebody would win the World Series at the World Series, they immediately would get into the biggest, highest stakes games they could find. Well, in Atlantic City, the big game was this 75-150 stud game. I think Phil Ivey was in the game, and he's playing with Robert Varconi. So yeah, I go over to Donald Trump and I said, "Mr. Trump, the world champion of poker is here right now." And he says, "Take me to him." And so I take Donald Trump up to the high limit section. And I don't even know Robert Varconi, but I was like, "Oh, I want to introduce you." So I introduced Donald Trump to Robert Varconi as if I know either one of these guys. And Donald Trump drags Robert Varconi out into the middle of the poker room, and he makes everybody in the poker room shut up. And he goes, "Everybody listen up." He said, "This guy right here, what's your name? What's your name? Robert. This guy, Robert, is the world champion of poker." This is my Donald Trump impression, is the best I can do. "This guy's the world champion of poker. Everybody clap for him. Everybody clap." And this is like late at night on a Saturday. Nobody wants to clap for Robert Varconi. Like there's like this tepid applause or whatever. And then he just basically shoos Robert Varconi away. And then I am still standing there as if I'm standing next to this whole thing, as if I have anything to do with either of these people. And so I turned to him and I was like, "Hey man, it's my birthday. Can I like get a free room or something?" And he goes, "You can have a picture." So I took a picture with him. That's all I got. That's my one brush with Donald Trump. Hopefully it
And I
won't be my
believe
last.
I believe you've posted that picture to Twitter before, right?
I don't know that I have.
Oh,
Maybe
you
I
don't?
have. Maybe I
Probably,
have.
Okay,
probably
I've seen the
wise.
picture.
If I post that picture, guys like Tom are going to blackmail me with it forever. Like anytime they catch me tweeting anything bad about Donald Trump, it'll be like in the first reply will be Thomas Viola,
That is
posting
a
that
thousand
picture of me
percent
and
something
Trump.
I would do. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, family members of mine that have that picture text it to me all the time, just to ride me because they know I don't like Trump. But I'll tweet it. I don't care. I don't, whatever.
I
I'll
actually
send it to you, Tom. I'll send it to you so you can.
I had a meeting with him once. I was in the Plaza Hotel and I was looking for directions and he helped me out there. So that was an interesting time.
You had gotten separated from your parents.
Exactly. It was back. I was in New York. It was a long time ago. Um,
He was, that's the great thing about New York, and I suppose Atlantic City too, is that like in New York, everybody's just there in the soup together, and you can run into famous people all the time, like just going out about your day.
yeah, it happens out here in Vegas a lot more than you think too. Like, I mean, everybody's here. They're just always at the casinos there. But David, my last question for you before we head out here, who won the blackjack ball skills competition?
Oh my gosh. Well, there was like, I can't remember who got first place. It was somebody from the Hall of Fame team, I think. Um, I don't even know, Jack. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say the names of people who were there, but the person who got second was in the field, so I did cash a ticket on betting the field.
I'll give you one hint, and maybe people are going to get upset at me. They attend the ball every year. Always bet on the lawyers. The lawyers always have somebody at the final table. And Rufus was right. Don't bet on the sports bettors. I mean, good luck if
But
Rufus is even paying attention to the competition.
I
Roxy,
do want to say, I do want to say that the women team was a huge long shot. I made a big bet on the women, and Gina was a part of that team, and she made it up to the stage.
What
I
a
think she
shocker.
was in the top five or top four or something like that, and she almost cashed for everybody that was holding those tickets, but I she blew some trivia question or something and didn't get to the final table.
That might have been my favorite anecdote from the entire story is just picturing like everybody at the ball and it's just we've of course figured out a way to gamble on this. Like,
oh yeah,
yeah.
Calcutta.
And it wasn't a Calcutta this year. I've been to the ball before, and it's traditionally a Calcutta, which I think is very fun. But I guess the big bankrolls kind of dominate the Calcutta because you get so people like me that don't have big bankroll get kind of shut out of participants. So this year they had done a parimutuel
Mm.
betting window like at the track, and I thought that was kind of it was a very cool innovation. And so everybody, no matter how much you could bet, $5 you could bet. And one of the things that Richard told me was that they had given people these like free bets. Everybody had like a $5 free bet, and they had given all the staff who worked the ball free bets. They said they gave them all the five, and so all the staff pooled their free bets together and made one big bet together. And I think they made their bet on the field, so they actually cashed
Oh,
and
that
made
is
some money
awesome.
on that. Yeah.
David, thank you so much for joining us here today. Now, I have managed to botch the title of the piece enough times here. I am going to hand things off to you. Can you tell people where they can find you, all of your fantastic work, including, of course, this awesome article from Rolling Stone here?
Sure. I have a website, davidhillonline.com. You could go there. You can buy a copy of my book. You can see things that I've written. This piece that we're talking about today is called Sportsbook Nation, and it's online today. It's in this month's issue of Rolling Stone that has Timothy Chalamet on the cover. So you can pick that up at your nearest newsstand if those even exist anymore, or wherever you buy magazines. And I'm on Twitter at DaveHill77, and I'm also on the new Twitter, butterfly Twitter thing, and I don't even know what my name is there. I think it's just David Hill. But come and find me and say hello, and I'll follow you back.
Is it butterfly? Is it blue sky?
Yes, Blue Sky.
Yeah, we're allowed to say that, right?
So far.
Elon won't shut us down. All right. David, once again, thank you so much for the time today. We really appreciate it. Absolutely fantastic piece. It was a great read, as all of your stuff always is. Seriously, go check him out today. One more time, the website name, davidhill.com.
DavidHillOnline.com.
davidhillonline.com. You can check him out and all of his awesome work there. Highly recommend it. And also, hey, holidays are coming up, and Dad's always difficult to buy for. I can think of nothing better than getting Dave's book, because it is a fantastic page turner, and that's perfect dad literature right there.
It's big with dads.
Yes,
it's big with dads.
you know your market there. So there you go. I just solved a bunch of people's Christmas ideas. But for now, that is going to do it for us here. Thank you guys so much for listening. You know the drill. As always, leave that 5-star rating and review. And of course, we'll be back next week. But for now, best of luck, everybody. Let's not get limited, and let's cash some tickets. We'll see you next time.